If you look at inflation in the first 6 months of this year, it's as bad as it was in the last 6 months of 1981. In other words, the rate of inflation currently raging in our country has not been achieved since 1981, 40 years ago. This is a huge issue. In my travels around Kentucky over the last couple of weeks, everybody's talking about it. In grocery stores, in manufacturing, businesses, nursing homes, everybody's experiencing inflation. And of course, in addition, the difficulty of getting people back to work. Secondly, I've noticed that the Democrat minority in the Kentucky, in the Texas legislature is up here today, and I think it's quite interesting to see the Democratic majority in the Senate concerned about minority rights in the state Senate in Texas. I guess if you live long enough, you'll see almost anything around here.
Yeah, and on that point, the Democrats from the Texas state legislature are in Washington, D.C. here, as the leader pointed out, ironically, to protest the fact that they're being sort of run roughshod over in Texas, being cut out of the legislative process. The same Democrats who are trying to get rid of the legislative filibuster here in the United States Senate. Again, I mean, remarkable, right? The irony. And let me just say that, too, with respect to the issue of inflation, it's the highest inflation that we've seen literally since 2008. And I remember, it's a long time ago, I was in college at the time, back in the early 1980s and late 1970s, the incredibly adverse impact that had on the economy of a place like South Dakota, an agricultural economy. Because typically when inflation goes up, interest rates follow with it. And most agriculture is financed, a large part of it, by borrowing, both for the real estate component and also operating loans to allow them to operate every year. Inflation just devastated the farm sector of the economy, but it's not just the farm sector, it's really every sector of the economy. And probably the biggest impact, of course, falls on consumers across this country. We're paying more for gasoline, paying more for food, paying more for housing. Those are some of the implications of an economy where people aren't paying attention to what Washington is doing. And right now we've got a Washington that is out of control in terms of spending. The $2 trillion that was put on the debt earlier this year has been flooding the zone with more dollars. The money supply continues to go up, and inflation is tracking with it to the, as the leader pointed out, to the tune that it really is comparable to what we saw back in the early 1980s, which was historic. So I think, I'm hoping at least that as Democrats think about these spending plans, that these statistics will give them pause. Because if they go down the path they're headed down, it's another $6 trillion in spending, financed by tax increases, which would be harmful to growth in the economy, which incidentally does help the fiscal picture improve, because when you've got growth in the economy, it means people are making money, taking realizations, paying more taxes, revenue goes up. If you kill growth in the economy, which taxes would do, you're going to see less growth, and then also you're going to see the impact of the amount of debt that they would be adding and the dollars they would flood the zone with, which would continue to adversely impact the inflation rate in this country. Lots of adverse economic effects and consequences of some of the decisions that are being made by Democrats here in Washington. Hopefully they'll come to a different conclusion, but we are not going to make it easy for them because this is very, very harmful to the country.
Well, we have a crisis at our southern border. It's a humanitarian crisis. It's a health care crisis. It's a national security crisis. The people living along the border are living with it every day. People all across the country are well aware of it, very concerned about it, and yet the only people that don't seem to be too concerned about it are the people in the White House. The number of illegal immigrants coming across the border each month is record high numbers. Many are carrying with them diseases, potentially deadly diseases. Earlier this year, when I was in Texas at the Donna facility, 1 in 10 of the young unaccompanied minors who were there were testing positive for coronavirus. We now know there are new, more deadly variants of coronavirus, some being brought into this country by people from outside the country, and we're also learning that these variants are ones that the vaccines that so many of us have already received may not be as effective against this variant of the virus that we wish that it would be. So the Center for Disease Control last year put into place something under Title 42 of the public health laws to prevent certain people from coming into the country because of the virus and the potential harm to the health care of the American people. It now seems that the Biden administration is once again surrendering to the loudest and most radical voices of their party, because it's understood now I've understood that the press is learning that the White House plans to no longer keep in place this Title 42 effort to keep people out of the country who may be bringing disease in. As a result, we're looking at even more illegal immigrants coming into the country. Tomorrow, a dozen Republicans are going to have a press event. We're going to send a letter to the President of the United States reminding him that his obligation and his job is to protect the safety and security of the United States and the American people, not to listen to the loudest, most radical voices of his party who want to weaken our border security and weaken our national security in the process.
Well, as Senator Barrasso pointed out, the border policies aren't getting better and the consequences are getting worse. No longer worried potentially with that CDC rule letting more people into the country, but also the problem of taking money that's been appropriated to fight COVID and to have to use it now to spend at the border. Another $823 million this week was transferred, most of it from the National Institute of Health, money that had been appropriated to fight COVID, now going to deal with the issue of unaccompanied children at the border. Almost $4 billion has been transferred into that account already, and $1 billion of that $4 billion was from COVID money at the National Institute of Health. The other thing we've got to be more concerned about, obviously, is the vaccine. I was just in Missouri. Our numbers are not where we'd like them to be. In early June, we were having about 400 new cases a day. Now we're having something closer to 1,400 new cases a day. And at every event I was at, I encouraged people to get the vaccine unless their doctor had specifically discouraged them from getting the vaccine. We're in a fight now here and around the world, frankly, where it's sort of vaccine versus variant. The way you don't have all these new strains is you don't give the you don't give the virus anywhere to live and become more resilient. That's the case here. You need to get vaccinated, even if you think you don't have an individual problem. We've got to stop having places for the virus to begin to mutate, to begin to develop a different variant. Frankly, that's the way our country, which because of what we did with warp speed under the prior administration, we're going to have a lot of extra vaccines, and we should be interested in getting those vaccines to other people in the world. Nobody will benefit from having this virus continue to develop other variants. So it's vaccine versus variant, first at home, and then whatever we can do to help fight that same fight all over the world. We are not nearly in as bad a place as we were, but we're not nearly as good a place as we would all like to be.
Well, happy Independence, everybody, Independence Day. Every day should be Independence Day, and it had significant meaning for me this year as I was able to go overseas and spend that long weekend with my Iowa National Guardsmen. They are serving abroad and supporting our quest for freedom and liberty. And I bring that up because, one, I want to say thank you to them, but two, I also want to recognize that we are engaged in a withdrawal from Afghanistan. And unfortunately, the president's speech the other day left a lot to be desired for those that have served in that theater. And so I am going to take this moment to say thank you. to all those that have served in Afghanistan for what you have done and contributed to the safety of our great nation. We will never, ever forget. Now, with the withdrawal of Afghanistan, it is being done in a haphazard fashion. And we engaged in Afghanistan because of the terrorist threat that resided within the borders of that country. Unfortunately, there are still terrorists in Afghanistan. So I am moving forward with a piece of legislation which would require our Department of Defense, our intelligence agencies, and Homeland Security to assess the threat that is left behind in Afghanistan, and then take a look at other ports, areas of entry to our United States, including our southern border, and ways that we can prevent terrorists from coming from abroad and into this country. So the threat still exists, folks. We know that. We are bringing our troops home. But again, I want to say, we appreciate the service of those that have given so much in Afghanistan, and we wish them a welcome home.
So I have a real concern about what's going on in Cuba. I hope everybody's following that. We have the biggest peaceful protests in decades, and the people of Cuba finally said enough's enough. They're tired of not having electricity, not having food, not having water, not having medicine, and they're showing up on the streets. Unfortunately, let me show you some pictures of what's going on. The Castro regime is cracking down. You can, I don't know how well you can see the picture here, but they're sending in their thugs, their police force and others, and just taking people away. And we don't know where they are. There's one picture. Here's another picture of an individual that's being taken away. If you hear from some of the dissidents down there, like Jose Daniel Ferrer, we don't know where he is. We don't know where he is. We don't know where his 18-year-old son is. But what we do know is the Castro regime is cracking down on these peaceful protests. I was on a radio show this morning, and they had audio of gunshots into the peaceful protesters, so we don't know how many people possibly have lost their lives. I'm disappointed in the Biden administration. They have an opportunity to be a worldwide leader, to say we support the people of Cuba. We believe in free and fair elections. We believe in liberty, and try to rally the international community, all peace-loving people around the world, to support the people of Cuba. Unfortunately, what you hear out of the Biden administration, they're more interested in trying to figure out how to work with dictators. Yesterday, if you saw in Venezuela, they tried to arrest Juan Guaido, the interim president. At the exact same time, the Biden administration allowed fuel to be going in to Venezuela, which it didn't help the Guaido group, it helped the Maduro group. So the Biden administration's got to show up and start helping the people around the world.
Chad?
Thank you. Dovetailing on what Senator Scott said, what do you think that lawmakers should be doing? What should they be saying about Cuba to, address this issue of the protesters in Cuba and stoke that?
Well, Senator Scott may be the best one to answer that question, but obviously we're pulling for the people of Cuba. This has been an outrageous, thuggish regime for some 70 years now. Whether this uprising is strong enough to overcome the thugs that typically put these down, I don't know. But I think we ought to support them in every conceivable way.
Senator McConnell, what Senator Blunt said on capital security, what would you like to see the Senate pass this work period?
Well, at the Appropriations Committee, we're in discussion with the majority on providing funding for the Capitol Police, which needs to be dealt with before the August recess, and we need to reimburse the National Guard for their expenses.
Senator Blunt, Senator McConnell, could you, picking up from Senator Blunt, do you have a message to conservative commentators and some Republicans who have been raising questions about the vaccine and its efficacy?
Yeah, I don't know how many times you all have heard me say this, but I'm a huge fan of vaccinations. As a polio victim myself when I was young, I've studied that disease. It took 70 years to come up with 2 vaccines that finally ended the polio threat. As a result of Operation Warp Speed, not 1, not 2, but 3 highly effective vaccines. And so I'm perplexed by the difficulty we have in finishing the job. If you're a football fan, we're in the red zone, but we're not in the end zone yet, and we need to keep preaching that getting the vaccine is important. Nobody knows more about that than Senator Blunt. I don't know if you want to add anything, Roy, to what I've said here, but we need to finish the job, and part of it is just convincing the American people of the importance of doing this. Everyone who knows this subject says that if you get the disease again, chances are pretty good you're not going to die from it if you get vaccinated. So I don't know how many times we have to keep saying it, but for myself, I intend to keep saying it over and over and over again. Roy, do you want to add anything?
Well, I think, Leader, that the point is that you can't just expect that if everybody else is going to get the vaccine and somehow that's going to protect you. That actually might be the case, but we're at a critical moment here where the way to stop this is to be sure it has nowhere that it can continue to spread to other people. And my comment about the variants, we know that this last variant is more viral. Number of people have had the vaccine got that variant because it is so viral, but none of them have died, and almost none of them have gone to the hospital. So you protect yourself, but what we don't want to do is let this drag on here or anywhere else in the world to where a variant is developed that these vaccines aren't dealing with and have to start back right where we were again. The whole idea of community immunity only comes when enough people step up and do what they need to do for themselves and the community they live in. Now, I'm not for mandatory vaccination, but I'm certainly doing everything I can to encourage voluntary vaccination.
Respectfully, though, it isn't all that perplexing. There are Republicans who are casting doubt on the vaccine. Senator Johnson hosting an event spotlighting the rare side effects. That's where this hesitancy is coming from members of your own party casting doubt on vaccines. What are your conversations with Senator Johnson, other Republicans who are casting doubt on vaccines?
Yeah, I've already answered the question about how I feel about this. I can only speak for myself, and I just did a few minutes ago. Yeah.
Do you personally support additional funds for the IRS to enforce tax collection, and what, if any, protections or limitations do you need to be put around that?
Yeah, well, that's a part of the ongoing bipartisan discussion over the possibility of moving separately a bipartisan infrastructure package. I'm among those who are observing what's going on, hoping that somehow we may find a way forward. And so at this point, I don't think I want to comment on any of the particular provisions of it. Those in our conference who are working on it are trying to get it in a form that's scored and that we can all take a look at.